I want you to do something for me. I want you to close your eyes.
Okay.
Well, unless you're driving, please don't close your eyes if you're driving.
Good caveat.
But imagine you're a betting person, a man or a woman, living in the Roman Empire. The year is, let's say, roughly AD 33.
All right, I'm there.
Yeah.
Setting the scene. Togas, chariots, maybe some gladiatorial combat in the background noise.
Right, exactly. And I take you to this dusty, sun-baked, absolute backwater of a province, a place called Judea.
The edge of the map.
Totally the edge of the map. And I point out a group of people, and they're all huddled in a room in Jerusalem. There's about, 120 of them?
So not exactly a stadium crowd.
Not at all. And look at who they are. You've got some fishermen from Galilee, which is, kind of the flyover country of ancient Israel.
Mm-hmm.
You've got maybe a tax collector, which basically makes you a social pariah.
The most hated guy in the room.
Right. And a few women. And they are absolutely terrified.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Because their leader was just executed.
Executed in the most shameful, public way the Roman Empire could possibly invent. Crucifixion.
A death reserved for slaves and rebels.
Yeah.
The lowest of the low.
So here's the bet. I put 1,000 denarii on the table, and I ask you, will this group of people, this terrified little bunch, take over the Roman Empire?
And if I'm a rational person living in AD 33, I am absolutely betting against them.
You're not even thinking about it.
No, I'm betting the house against them. It's the safest bet in history.
But why? What's the logic there?
Because history, especially at that time, is just a graveyard of messianic movements from that specific time and place.
Right.
There were dozens of guys who claimed to be the Messiah in the first century. You hear about Theudas, Judas of Galilee, Simon Bar Kokhba a bit later on. And the pattern is always the same. The leader rises up, he gathers a following, Rome gets annoyed.
Yes, they do.
The leader gets killed, and the followers just scatter. Or they get absorbed back into society. The movement dies with the man. That is the sociological rule.
But that's not what happened with this group.
No. Against every single betting odd, this tiny persecuted sect didn't just dissolve.
It did the opposite.
It exploded. And within just a few centuries, the Emperor of Rome himself would be bowing to the carpenter from Galilee. It becomes the dominant cultural force of the Western world.
So the question we are deep diving into today is how?
Yeah, how?
How on earth did that happen? And we aren't just looking for, the Sunday school answers here.
So
We have a whole stack of sources. We've got history books, sociological studies, even letters from Roman governors that claim this wasn't just, luck.
we're looking at the claim that the founding of the church was a miracle of history. And I don't use that word lightly.
No.
The sources, they really argue that there was a kind of perfect storm of conditions, political, cultural, and religious, that allowed this impossible growth to happen.
So we're covering what's known as the Apostolic Age, which, for our purposes, runs from the crucifixion around AD 33 to about AD 177.
Right.
And to kick this whole thing off, we have to talk about a phrase that just kept popping up in all the reading: the fullness of time.
Right. This is originally a theological phrase. It's from the New Testament. It's Galatians 4.4, yeah. The writer, Paul, says, "When the fullness of the time came, God sent forth his Son."
You see, when I've read that in the past, I always interpreted it purely in a spiritual sense. Like, God set an alarm clock up in heaven, it finally rang, and he said, okay, time to go.
And that's how it's often read. It's not wrong, but it might be incomplete. The historians in our source stack argue that fullness implies something structural.
Structural.
Yeah, it suggests the container was finally ready to be filled. The argument is, if Jesus had been born 100 years earlier, or maybe 100 years later, the spread of the message might have been physically impossible.
So you're saying the world was prepped?
The Mediterranean world was prepped in 3 very specific, very distinct ways that all converged right at that exact moment.
Okay, let's break those down. The first factor, this seems like the obvious one, is the political situation. It's all about Rome.
It is. It's the Pax Romana, the Roman peace.
Okay, I have to stop you right there. Roman peace. I've heard this term a million times, but I've also read about what Rome did to its enemies. There's that famous line by a Celtic chieftain: they create a desert and call it peace. So, was it actually peaceful, or was it just a boot on the neck of the world?
That is the critical nuance, isn't it? It depends who you ask. For a Roman citizen living in a nice villa in Italy, it was a golden age of peace and prosperity.
Sure.
For a Judean peasant or a conquered Gaul, it was occupation, no question. But here's the insight from the source material that really matters for our story. The Pax Romana wasn't about happiness. It was about logistics.
Logistics, that's a very unromantic way to put it.
But it's everything. Think about borders.
Yeah.
Before the Roman Empire really consolidated power, if you wanted to travel from, say, Syria to Spain, you were crossing dozens of little kingdoms, city-states, tribal territories.
So you're paying tolls constantly, you're getting stopped, you have to change currencies.
And you're getting robbed. Or worse, the Mediterranean Sea, for example, was just infested with pirates. It was incredibly dangerous to sail anywhere.
Right.
But just a few decades before the Christian era, the Roman general Pompey completely cleared the seas of pirates. Then Augustus comes in and stabilizes all the borders. And suddenly, for the first time in history, the entire Mediterranean basin was under one management.
It was basically a giant free trade zone.
Essentially, yes. But the biggest factor, the one that historians cite over and over again as the absolute game changer, was the road system.
The famous Roman roads. All roads lead to Rome.
We all learned that in grade school, but we totally missed the scale of it. Rome built 50,000 miles of paved roads. 50,000.
And these weren't just, dirt tracks.
Oh, no. These were engineering marvels. We're talking layered stone, drainage ditches, straight lines that cut right through mountains. They were built to last, and many of them are still there.
But they didn't build them for missionaries to go on nice walks.
No, of course not. They built them for the legions. The whole point was to be able to march an army from Rome to the frontier in record time to crush a rebellion.
It was military infrastructure.
Purely military. And that brings us to this great analogy one of the sources used.
The internet.
The internet. It's the best analogy. The internet was built by DARPA for military defense.
Right, for communication during a nuclear war.
Exactly. But eventually it became the vehicle for global communication, commerce, and, cat videos.
And cat videos. Can't forget those.
The Roman roads were exactly the same. They were built for war, but they inadvertently created the perfect network for the gospel to travel at a speed that was unimaginable before.
The sources mentioned something called the cursus publicus. I'd never heard of this before.
That was the state-run courier system. It was incredible. Rome had these relay stations set up every 10 to 15 miles along the major roads.
What was at these stations?
Fresh horses, a place to sleep, food. It was like an official Pony Express. Now, officially, this was only for government business.
So Paul the Apostle couldn't just walk up and say, hey, I need a fresh horse for my missionary journey.
No, definitely not. But the infrastructure itself created a whole shadow economy of travel.
Ah, okay.
Inns sprung up around these stations. Towns and villages developed along these routes. It meant that a normal traveler, not on official business, could still cover 20 miles a day, consistently, for months on end.
With a level of safety that was completely unprecedented.
Unprecedented. One historian we read actually called the Roman army the mouthpiece of the gospel. Not because they were preaching, but because they paved the way for it.
That is a wild irony. The very empire that would later try to systematically crush this movement built the highway system that allowed it to spread in the first place.
It is. Without the Pax Romana, the Great Commission to go into all the world would have been a logistical nightmare, just a non-starter.
Okay, so Rome provides the hardware, the roads, the safety, the political unity. But if you're going to spread a message, you need software. You need a common way to communicate. Because if I walk from Jerusalem to Rome today, I'm passing through, at least 5 different major language zones?
And that leads us to the second major factor, the Greek influence.
Wait, Greek? I thought we were talking about Rome. The Romans spoke Latin.
They did, yes. Legally and militarily, the language of power was Latin. But culturally, the entire known world was Greek.
This is from Alexander the Great, right?
Centuries earlier, yeah.
Yeah.
Alexander the Great had conquered the whole region, and he was completely obsessed with spreading Hellenistic or Greek culture. He planted cities, libraries, and schools everywhere he went. He was an evangelist for Greekness.
So the culture just stuck, even after the political power shifted over to Rome.
Absolutely. The Romans conquered Greece with their armies, but Greece conquered Rome with its culture. And the result was a common language called Koine Greek.
Koine just means common, doesn't it?
That's all it means, yes.
Yes.
It was the street Greek. It wasn't the high, poetic, classical Greek of Homer or Plato. It was the business English of the ancient world.
So it was the language of trade and daily life.
You got it. You could go from Spain all the way to India, and even if you didn't speak the local dialect, you could probably find someone who spoke Koine Greek. It was the lingua franca.
So when the New Testament was written?
It was written entirely in Koine Greek. And this is huge. This cannot be overstated.
Why?
Well, think about it. If the disciples had written in Aramaic, their native tongue, or in classical Hebrew, the text would have been unreadable to 99% of the empire.
It would have stayed a local phenomenon.
Exactly. If they wrote in Latin, it would have been mainly for the elites in the western part of the empire. But Greek. Everybody read Greek.
It just completely lowered the barrier to entry for the message.
Drastically. It meant that when a letter from Paul arrived in a city like Ephesus or Corinth, it didn't need to be translated. It could be read aloud immediately to this mixed audience of slaves, merchants, nobles, men, women. Everyone heard the same message in a language they understood.
But the Greek influence wasn't just about vocabulary, was it? The sources we looked at talk a lot about philosophy.
This is the intellectual prep work. Greek philosophy, Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics, had spent centuries asking these enormous questions.
Like what?
Well, is there one God? Or are there many? Is there a reality beyond the physical world we see? Is there a logos, a divine reason or word that holds the entire universe together?
Logos. That's the word that John uses in his gospel. In the beginning was the word, the logos.
He was plugging directly into a massive conversation that Greek intellectuals had been having for 400 years.
He's using their term.
He's using their term and saying, that abstract reason you've all been looking for, that ordering principle of the cosmos, it's not an abstract concept, it's a person. And he walked among us.
So the pagan world was actually, in a way, hungry for this kind of message.
They were starving for it.
Yeah.
The old Roman gods, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, they were petty, they were immoral, and frankly, to an educated person in the first century, they were kind of silly.
They didn't inspire real devotion.
No, they felt hollow. People were looking for something transcendent, something with moral weight, something that was actually true. Greek philosophy had tilled the intellectual soil, making minds ready to receive a monotheistic faith that had real philosophical depth.
Okay, so we've got Roman roads, which is the political unity. We've got the Greek language and philosophy, the cultural unity. But there's a third factor, and this one really surprised me because I usually think of these two groups as being enemies. The Jewish diaspora.
This is the religious foundation.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's the piece of the puzzle that's often overlooked. We tend to think of ancient Judaism as being confined to Israel, to Palestine.
Yeah, that's the mental image.
But by the first century, because of centuries of wars, exiles, and trade, Jewish communities were scattered, dispersed all over the empire.
Hence the word diaspora.
Right, from the Greek word for scattering. There was a massive Jewish community in Alexandria, in Egypt, in Antioch, in Syria, in Rome itself, in almost every major city in the Mediterranean world.
And wherever there were Jews, there was a synagogue.
Wherever there were at least 10 Jewish men, there was a synagogue. And this is strategically critical for the early Christians.
Why does that matter so much?
Because the synagogue wasn't just a church. It was a community center, a school, a social hub. And for the first missionaries, it was the launch pad.
The entry point.
The absolute entry point. When Paul, for example, entered a strange city, he didn't just stand on a random street corner and start shouting to confused pagans who had zero context for what he was talking about.
What did he do?
He went straight to the synagogue.
Because the people there already had the backstory.
Exactly. They knew the law of Moses. They read the prophets. They were steeped in a story that was building towards something. They were expecting a Messiah.
Right.
So Paul could walk into a room where everyone had the same operating system, the same worldview. They just needed, in his view, the final update.
Yeah.
He could say, you know that Messiah you've been waiting for? Well, he came.
But it wasn't just ethnic Jews in the synagogue, was it? The sources really highlight this group called the God-fearers.
This is one of the most important and tragically overlooked groups in all of history.
So who were they?
These were Gentiles.
Yeah.
Romans, Greeks, people from all over who were deeply attracted to Judaism.
What did they like about it?
They loved the monotheism. It made so much more sense compared to the chaotic pantheon of pagan idolatry.
One God is simpler than hundreds.
Right. And they loved the morality. The Ten Commandments, the focus on family, the high ethical standards. It was a stark contrast to the moral laxity of Roman society.
So why didn't they just convert and become Jewish?
They wanted to. They would attend synagogue services. They would pray to the God of Israel. They would follow many of the customs. But there's a massive, massive barrier to full conversion.
The hardware issue, as it were.
Specifically, yes, circumcision.
Yeah. I can see why a grown Roman man in the first century would hesitate there. I love your God, your morality is great, but I'd like to keep my anatomy fully intact, thank you.
And it wasn't just the pain, though that was obviously significant in a world without anesthesia. It was the social stigma. The Greco-Roman world glorified the athletic, unclothed male body. Mutilation of any kind was seen as barbaric, something for slaves and foreigners.
So these God-fearers are stuck. They're standing at the threshold of the faith.
They are. They're spiritual spectators, unable to become full participants. They're stuck in this spiritual limbo.
And then Paul walks in.
And then Paul walks in. And his message to them is absolutely explosive. He says, you can have the God of Israel. You can have the morality and the meaning. You can be grafted into the chosen people. And you don't need the surgery. You are justified by faith alone.
That must have been like a dam breaker.
It was the key that unlocked the door for the Gentile world. That specific demographic, the God-fearers, they became the bridge. They were the first massive wave of non-Jewish converts because Christianity offered them everything they wanted from Judaism without the one thing they feared.
So, you put it all together, you have the safety of the Roman roads, the universality of the Greek language, and this incredible network of Jewish synagogues filled with people primed for the message.
It really does look like a setup.
It's hard for historians, even secular ones, to deny that the timing was just impeccable. A perfect storm.
Absolutely. The stage was perfectly set.
So the stage is set, the conditions are perfect. Now let's talk about the event itself, the spark. The timeline in our sources really kicks off with the day of Pentecost.
Right. This is roughly AD 33. It's a Jewish harvest festival, and it takes place 50 days after Passover.
Which means Jerusalem is packed.
It's packed with pilgrims, Jewish pilgrims from all over the Roman Empire, people who've traveled along those very Roman roads we just talked about.
And where are the disciples at this point?
They're hiding. They're keeping a very low profile. Their leader has just been brutally executed. They're afraid they're next.
But then something happens.
Then, according to the account in the book of Acts, the Holy Spirit descends on them. And the descriptions are incredibly visceral. A sound like a freight train, what looked like tongues of fire appearing over their heads.
And this changes them.
Completely. They go from being terrified and hiding to spilling out into the streets of Jerusalem, preaching boldly.
But they aren't just preaching in Aramaic, their local language.
No. And this is the core of the event, the miracle. They were speaking in the native languages of all those diverse pilgrims who were in town for the festival.
So you have Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia.
All these people from different parts of the empire are hearing the message in their own mother tongue. The source in Acts presents it as a direct reversal of the Tower of Babel.
Where language divided people.
Exactly. Here, miraculously, language is uniting them.
The sources say 3,000 people converted that day. Now, I've been to large events. Organizing 3,000 people for anything is a logistical nightmare. So what happens when the festival ends and everyone goes home?
Well, that's the genius of the timing, isn't it? Those 3,000 new converts, they go home.
Back to their lives.
They go back to Rome, to Alexandria, to Cyrene in North Africa. They carry this spark with them before there are even any formal missionaries. The wildfire starts spreading through the veins of the empire immediately, organically.
But at this early stage, it's still a completely Jewish phenomenon, right? They don't think they've started a new religion.
Not at all. They think they are the fulfillment of Judaism. They are the true Jews who have recognized the Messiah. They call their movement the Way.
But it grew too fast to stay contained within Judaism.
Far too fast. And we really need to talk about the key personalities that drove this initial expansion, because they're such different, fascinating characters.
Well, you have to start with Peter, the rock.
Peter is the anchor. He's the uneducated fisherman from Galilee who becomes the de facto leader of the Jerusalem church.
He's the spokesman.
He is. But he's also crucial because he's the one who first officially crosses the ethnic line. In Acts chapter 10, he has this vision and ends up visiting the house of Cornelius,
A Roman centurion.
a Gentile, an officer in the occupying army. And Peter enters his house, which was technically forbidden by Jewish custom for a Jew to enter a Gentile's home, and he eats with him and baptizes him and his whole household.
It's the first real crack in the wall between Jew and Gentile in the church.
A huge crack. But the guy who comes along and takes a sledgehammer to that wall is Paul.
Saul of Tarsus, who becomes Paul.
Paul is the architect of the global church. And if you just look at his resume, his background, he is a walking embodiment of the fullness of time.
He's a hybrid?
He's a Swiss Army knife of a human being. It's incredible. Religiously, he's a Pharisee of Pharisees. He studied under the great Rabbi Gamaliel. He knows the Hebrew scriptures inside and out better than anyone.
So he can go into any synagogue and debate the rabbis on their own terms.
Effortlessly. He has the credentials. But culturally, he's not from Jerusalem. He's from Tarsus, which was a major university town in modern-day Turkey.
So he's Hellenized.
Completely. He speaks Greek fluently. He knows the Greek poets. He can stand on the Areopagus in Athens and quote their own philosophers back to them. He's intellectually bilingual.
And politically.
And this is maybe the most important part. He is a Roman citizen by birth.
Which was basically a get-out-of-jail-free card in the ancient world?
Literally. There are multiple scenes in the book of Acts where the local magistrates are about to have him flogged, which was just standard procedure for a non-citizen troublemaker. And Paul just casually mentions, by the way, is it lawful for you to scourge a Roman citizen without a proper trial?
And the magistrates just freak out?
They turn white with fear. Because if they violated the rights of a Roman citizen, they could lose their jobs, their property, even their own heads. This citizenship allowed Paul to travel where others couldn't, to demand fair treatment, and eventually to appeal his legal case all the way to the emperor in Rome, which was his ultimate goal. It gave the movement a kind of legal standing it otherwise never would have had.
So Paul takes the message west, methodically working his way through the Roman world with his arguments and letters. But the sources also mention Thomas.
Doubting Thomas. Yeah. We give him such a hard time for that one moment of doubt.
We do.
But history and tradition suggest he was an incredibly brave missionary. The tradition is very strong that he went east.
How far east?
All the way to India.
India. Seriously.
Yes. The Martama Church, which still exists in Kerala, in southern India, traces its lineage directly back to the Apostle Thomas arriving there in the 1st century.
That's incredible.
It just shows us that while Paul was systematically working the Roman grid, the message was already spilling off the edges of the known map. It was going everywhere.
Now, I want to pivot to something that really, really stood out to me in the source materials, and that's the role of women.
Because if you watch any movie about ancient Rome, it's a very male-dominated world.
Right.
It's all about senators, generals, gladiators.
It was an intensely patriarchal society. There's no way around that. Legally, women were treated like minors for their entire lives.
They were always under someone's authority.
Always. First their father, then their husband. They couldn't vote, couldn't hold public office. In many cases, their testimony wasn't even considered admissible in court.
But then you open up the early church documents, the letters of Paul, the book of Acts, and women are everywhere, and not just in the background.
It is shockingly countercultural. It's one of the things that made the movement so socially distinct.
Give me an example.
Okay, you have a woman like Phoebe. Paul mentions her at the end of his letter to the Romans in chapter 16. He calls her a deacon, a servant or minister of the church in Cenchreae, and he calls her a benefactor or patron to many, including himself.
And she's the one who delivered the letter to the church in Rome. Most scholars believe so. Now stop and think about what that means. Paul writes his theological masterpiece, the letter that will define Christian theology for the next 2,000 years. And he hands it to a woman to carry 800 miles to the capital of the world.
That's a lot of trust.
And more than that. In the ancient world, the person who delivered an important letter was usually the one tasked with reading it aloud and explaining its contents.
So you're saying a woman was likely the first person to ever teach and expound on the Book of Romans?
It's highly likely, which is huge.
It is huge. What about Priscilla?
Priscilla and her husband Aquila, they were tent makers, like Paul. But here's the interesting thing. In the 6 times they are mentioned in the New Testament, her name comes first 4 times. Priscilla and Aquila.
Why does that matter?
Because that is a glaring breach of ancient etiquette. You always name the man first. The fact that Luke and Paul so consistently put her name first strongly suggests she was the more prominent leader or teacher of the two.
And the sources mention she taught a man named Apollos.
Right. Apollos was this brilliant, eloquent, highly educated orator from Alexandria. He was a rising star. And the text says that Priscilla and Aquila took him aside and explained the way of God more adequately to him.
A woman is correcting the theology of a male intellectual.
In Roman society, that's a scandal. In the early church, it was a ministry.
And what about Junia?
Junia. This is a fascinating story of translation. In Romans 16, Paul sends greetings to Andronicus and Junia, and he calls them outstanding among the apostles.
An apostle, that's the highest rank.
The highest. This was so hard for later, more patriarchal generations to swallow that in the Middle Ages, translators and scribes actually added an S to her name, making it Junius, to turn her into a man.
They just couldn't believe a woman could be an apostle.
They thought, well, if she's called an apostle, she must be a dude. But the earliest manuscripts are clear. The name is Junia. She was a woman.
So why was the church so uniquely attractive to women in this period?
Because in a world that treated them as property, the church offered them dignity and agency.
That's...
It forbade female infanticide, which was a common Roman practice. If you had a daughter you didn't want, you just left her outside to die. The church rescued these children.
Wow.
It demanded that husbands remain faithful to their wives, which was a completely radical idea in a society where it was normal for men to have mistresses and visit prostitutes.
And it gave them spiritual equality.
That's the core of it. The declaration in Galatians 3:28, there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. That wasn't just a nice sentiment, it was a sociological revolution.
But this revolution, this new way of life, it eventually ran into a massive wall.
It did.
We need to talk about the separation from Judaism, because, as you said, for the first few decades, Christians were kind of flying under the radar.
We call it the umbrella of Judaism. It was a form of legal protection. See, the Romans were deeply suspicious of new religions. They thought anything new was just a superstitio, a dangerous, baseless superstition.
But they respected old things.
They revered antiquity. And Judaism was ancient. It was older than Rome itself. So they granted it the status of a legal, permitted religion.
And with that status came special privileges.
Exactly. Most importantly, because Jews were strict monotheists, Rome gave them a special exemption. They didn't have to worship the Roman gods or the emperor. They just had to pray for the emperor.
So as long as Christians were just seen as another sect of Jews, they were safe under that legal umbrella.
They were protected. The Romans just saw them as Jews who were weirdly obsessed with some crucified guy. It was an internal Jewish squabble.
But the umbrella started to leak.
It started to leak pretty quickly. The first major event was the Council of Jerusalem in about AD 49.
What happened there?
That was where the church leadership formally decided that Gentile converts did not need to become Jews first. They didn't need to be circumcised or follow all the dietary laws. This created a clear formal distinction. The Jewish leadership started saying, wait a minute, these guys aren't with us.
And then came the war.
The Jewish Revolt of AD 66. It was a brutal, bloody uprising. The Jews in Judea rose up against Roman rule.
And what did the Christians do?
The Christians, remembering Jesus' warning in the Gospels to flee to the mountains when they saw Jerusalem surrounded by armies, they didn't fight. They fled the city.
To the Jews who stayed and fought, that must have looked like the ultimate act of treason.
It was the final straw. The breaking point. Then in AD 70, the Roman general Titus, who would later become emperor, completely flattens the city of Jerusalem. He burns the temple to the ground.
The center of the Jewish world is gone.
Gone. Judaism had to completely restructure itself just to survive, and in that restructuring, they formally and finally pushed the Christians out. They were no longer welcome in the synagogue.
So the umbrella is gone. Christians are now standing out in the rain, exposed.
Completely exposed. They are now officially a new religion, which makes them illegal. And they refuse to worship the emperor, which makes them traitors.
And this brings us to the era of persecution.
Right. And we need to clarify something here, because we often have this image of 300 years of nonstop, unrelenting torture.
Like it was always at a fever pitch.
Exactly. It wasn't quite like that. It was more like waves. There were long periods of relative peace and quiet, and then these sudden, intense, often localized periods of violent persecution.
But the reason for the violence is so fascinating. The sources list the specific accusations that were leveled against the Christians. They were called atheists.
Which sounds completely absurd to us today, right?
Yeah, they're the ultimate theists.
But to a Roman, religion was a physical, visual thing. It was a temple. It was a statue of a god. It was an altar with a sacrifice. You walked past the temple of Jupiter. You saw the idol. You smelled the meat burning on the altar. That was religion.
And Christians had none of that.
None of it. They met in private homes, in living rooms. They worshipped an invisible spirit. They had no idols, no temples, no sacrifices.
So from a practical Roman point of view, they looked at them and said, you don't have any gods.
You're atheists. And since the gods were believed to protect the safety and prosperity of the empire, being an atheist was seen as a threat to national security. It was unpatriotic.
Okay, what about the charge of cannibalism? Where did that come from?
That's a game of telephone gone horribly wrong. Christians often had to meet in secret, either before dawn or late at night, because many of them were slaves and that's the only time they had off.
Right.
And in these secret meetings, they talked about eating the body and drinking the blood of the Son of Man.
The Eucharist, communion.
Of course. But if you're a suspicious pagan neighbor and you're listening through the wall to this weird secretive cult next door, and you overhear them talking about, this is my body, take and eat, your imagination is going to go to a very dark place.
And the final big charge was incest.
Because they called each other brother and sister. Even husbands and wives would refer to each other that way within the community. And they held what they called agape feasts, which literally means love feasts.
I can see how a cynical Roman would twist that.
Absolutely. A secret nighttime meeting of brothers and sisters having a love feast. To the Romans, that sounded like a depraved orgy.
So you have this group that is secretive, they're wildly misunderstood, and they are socially awkward and disruptive. They are a powder keg just waiting for a match.
And in AD 64, Nero lit the match.
The Great Fire of Rome.
This is the famous story.
Yeah.
One everyone knows. Nero fiddled while Rome burned.
He probably didn't actually fiddle, right?
No, the fiddle hadn't been invented. He might have played the lyre. But the rumor was that he started the fire himself.
Why?
Rome burned for 6 days. 10 of the city's 14 districts were destroyed. The people were homeless and furious, and the rumors spread like wildfire that Nero had done it deliberately to clear space for his new, gigantic, opulent palace, the Golden House.
So Nero needs a scapegoat, and he needs one fast.
And he points the finger at this strange, unpopular little sect called the Christians. And the punishment was theatrical in its cruelty.
This is where we get the account from Tacitus, the Roman historian.
Right. And Tacitus hated Christians. He calls their faith a deadly superstition.
Yeah.
But even he was disgusted by what Nero did. He writes that some Christians were covered in the skins of wild beasts and then torn apart by dogs in the arena for sport.
And the human torches.
Yes. This is the most infamous part. Nero had them dipped in pitch, tied to poles in his garden, and set on fire to serve as streetlights for his evening parties.
That's just monstrous.
It was horrific. And this is likely the period when the two main leaders, Peter and Paul, were executed in Rome.
But here's the thing that baffles the historians in our sources. This campaign of terror, it didn't work.
Terrorism works when it scares people into submission. But this had the exact opposite effect. It backfired spectacularly.
We see this later on, right? With the policy of the Emperor Trajan and Pliny the Younger.
Right. Pliny was a governor in what is now Turkey around AD 112, and he writes this amazing letter to the Emperor Trajan saying, basically, what am I supposed to do with these Christians? There are so many of them.
Help me out here.
Yeah, he says, I'm executing them, but they're just so stubborn. And honestly, I've investigated them, and I can't find any real crimes. Their big crime is that they meet before dawn, they sing hymns to Christ as to a god, and they take an oath not to steal or commit adultery.
He's basically describing a great citizen.
He is. And Trajan's response becomes the official policy for a long time. It's kind of a don't ask, don't tell policy.
What does he say?
He says, don't hunt them down. We're not going to actively seek them out. But if they are formally accused by someone, and they refuse to recant and curse Christ, then you must execute them.
So this leads us to the age of the martyrs. And I really want to tell the story of Polycarp because the actual transcript of his trial is one of the most moving documents from the ancient world.
Polycarp was the bishop of Smyrna. He was an old man, 86 years old, and he was a direct link to the very beginning. He was a disciple of the Apostle John himself.
So the authorities arrest him in AD 155. They drag him into the city stadium, which is packed. The crowd is baying for blood. But the Roman proconsul, the judge, he seems hesitant.
He really does. He doesn't want to kill this harmless old man. He practically pleads with him. He says, just swear an oath by the genius of Caesar. Just say, away with the atheists, meaning, denounce the Christians, and I'll let you go.
And Polycarp does something incredibly witty and defiant.
He does. He looks at the huge crowd of bloodthirsty pagans in the stands, the ones screaming for his death. He waves his hand at them and he shouts, away with the atheists.
Turning their own accusation right back on them.
Exactly. Then the proconsul presses him again. Curse Christ and you live. And this is when Polycarp gives his famous reply. 86 years have I served him, and he has done me no wrong. How can I blaspheme my king and my savior?
So they decided to burn him at the stake. But the accounts say he stood in the fire with such peace and prayed with such courage that it just shook the people who were watching.
And then you have the story of Blandina from about 20 years later in AD 177. She's at the complete other end of the social spectrum. She's a slave girl, weak, frail. Her Christian mistress was terrified that Blandina would snap under torture and deny the faith.
But she didn't.
They tortured her from morning until night. Her torturers had to work in shifts because they were getting exhausted. They roasted her alive in a hot iron chair. They threw her in a net to be gored and tossed by a wild bull. And every time she had the breath to speak, she just repeated, I am a Christian and we commit no wrongdoing.
The Romans, their highest value was courage, virtus. And here they are, watching slave girls and old men out dying their most celebrated gladiators with this quiet dignity.
And forced them to ask a question. What do these people have that I don't? What do they know? You don't die like that for a fairy tale you don't really believe in.
The church father, Tertullian, he summed it up perfectly. He said, "The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church."
The more you mow it down, the faster and stronger it grows. Persecution was a failed strategy.
So persecution was the great external threat. But the sources are very clear that there was a battle being fought on a second front at the same time, an internal threat.
The battle for truth. As the church grew and spread, it started to mutate. People from all different philosophical backgrounds came in and brought their own ideas with them. And the biggest, most dangerous mutation was Gnosticism.
I have tried to understand Gnosticism before, and it always just sounds like a crazy sci-fi movie. You have secret knowledge, an evil creator god. Why was this such a serious threat? Why didn't people just laugh it off?
Because it offered a compelling solution to a problem that Orthodox Christianity has always struggled to answer simply.
And what's that?
The problem of evil and suffering.
How so?
Well, just look around. The world is full of pain, disease, death, decay, corruption. If God is all good and all powerful and God made the world, why does the world suck so much? It's a tough question.
And the Gnostic answer to that is?
The good God didn't make this world.
It's an escape hatch from the problem.
It's the ultimate escape hatch. Gnostics taught that the physical, material world is inherently evil. It's a mistake. A cosmic prison created by a lesser, incompetent, and often malevolent God. They sometimes called him the demiurge. The true God is pure spirit and is totally separate from this mess.
So if matter and the physical world are evil, then my body is evil.
Right. Your body is a cage for the divine spark of spirit that is trapped inside you. And here is where it directly attacks the core of Christianity. If bodies are evil, then Jesus the Savior couldn't possibly have had a real physical body.
Because that would contaminate him with evil matter.
Exactly. So they taught a heresy called Docetism, from the Greek word to seem. They taught that Jesus only seemed to be human. He was like a ghost or a hologram. He didn't leave footprints in the sand. He didn't actually get tired or hungry. He didn't actually bleed on the cross.
But if he didn't actually bleed,
then he didn't actually die. And if he didn't die, there's no sacrifice for sins. And if he didn't have a real body, there's no bodily resurrection. Gnosticism turns Christianity into just a philosophy club about achieving secret enlightenment to escape the physical world. It completely guts the historical events.
Then you had a guy named Marcion who took this kind of thinking to its logical extreme.
Marcion was a wealthy ship owner from the 2nd century. And he basically said, I like Jesus, but I hate his dad.
Meaning the God of the Old Testament.
Yes. He thought the God of the Old Testament was the angry, judgmental, evil demiurge who created this flawed world. So he took a pair of scissors to the Bible.
Literally.
Metaphorically and literally. He created what was essentially the first ever New Testament canon, but it was a heavily edited version. He threw out the entire Old Testament. He threw out the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and John because he thought they were too Jewish.
What did he keep?
He kept a chopped-up version of the Gospel of Luke and 10 of Paul's letters, but he went through them and physically cut out any verse that linked Jesus to the creator God of the Jews.
So the church is being attacked by lions on the outside and by these editors and philosophers on the inside. How did they survive this? They didn't have a pope or a Vatican or a central headquarters yet.
They had to build walls. They had to define what was in and what was out. And they developed 3 main defenses. First, the canon.
In response to Marcion's cut-up Bible.
Exactly. The church leaders were forced to formally discuss and decide, what are the authoritative books? They affirmed the 4 Gospels we have today, the book of Acts, and the Apostolic letters as the true rule of faith.
Okay, so that's the first wall. What's the second?
The creeds. They needed short, simple, memorizable summaries of the core beliefs that you could use to test a new convert or identify a heretical teacher. This was the rule of faith, which later developed into things like the Apostles' Creed.
And the creed is designed to fight heresy.
Think about how the Apostles' Creed starts. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth.
That's a direct shot at the Gnostics right there.
Boom! Right in the first line. It's a declaration. The physical world is good, and our God made it. Then it goes on to say, Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate.
Born and suffered. Real birth, real body, real pain. He wasn't a hologram.
Exactly. Every line of the creed was a vaccination against a specific heresy.
And the third defense.
Apostolic succession. This was about authority. If some Gnostic teacher came to your town saying, I have a secret teaching that Jesus whispered to Thomas on a mountain, the local bishop could say, hold on a second. I was trained by Polycarp, who was trained by the Apostle John, who walked and talked with Jesus every day for 3 years. And John never mentioned any secret code or hidden teaching. So you're an innovator and you're lying.
It was a way to verify the chain of custody for the truth.
It was. It ensured continuity with the original message.
So they solidified the book, which is the canon, the belief, which is the creed, and the leadership, which is the bishops.
Yes, but they also had a fight in the public square of ideas, and this is where the apologists come in.
People like Justin Martyr.
Justin is a great example. He was a professional philosopher. He wore the traditional philosopher's robe. And he realized that you can't just quote Bible verses to a pagan emperor who doesn't believe the Bible is true. You have to meet them on their own ground. You have to speak their language.
So what was his strategy? How did he argue?
He argued that Christianity was, in fact, the true philosophy. He used the Greek philosophical concept of the logos that we talked about earlier. He basically told the emperor, look, everything true and good that you admire in Plato or Socrates, that was a partial glimpse of the divine logos. But we Christians have the full picture. Christ is the logos in person.
So he was trying to build a bridge to show that Christians weren't these irrational, antisocial haters of humanity.
Right. He argued that Christians were actually the best and most moral citizens the emperor had. They paid their taxes, they didn't start revolts, they cared for the poor and the sick. He was trying to reason with the state and dispel the slander.
It didn't end up saving his own life. He was martyred, which is why we call him Justin Martyr. But his writings gave the church a powerful intellectual backbone.
It proved that you didn't have to check your brain at the door to follow Jesus.
Yeah.
The faith was intellectually robust.
So we've kind of reached the end of this initial period, the end of the Apostolic Age, around AD 177. Let's just zoom out for a second and take stock.
Okay.
In AD 33, you have 120 scared people in an upper room in a backwater province.
A failed movement by all accounts.
By AD 177, you have a resilient international movement that spans from Spain to India. You have a New Testament. You have a network of organized churches. You have a sophisticated intellectual defense. And you have thousands of martyrs whose courageous deaths are actually fueling the growth.
It's an astonishing transformation.
It really does seem to fit the description of a miracle of survival. You have this movement that faced the military might of Rome, the intellectual scorn of Greece, and the religious hostility of the synagogue.
And instead of being crushed by those three forces,
It absorbed the best parts of all of them and used them for its own growth.
it utilized the Roman roads, it co-opted the Greek language, and it built upon the Jewish respect for Scripture and expectation of a Messiah. It was, historically speaking, the perfect storm.
It makes you wonder, though. We live in a world that is so comfortable compared to theirs.
No question.
We have the internet instead of Roman roads, but the concept is the same, instant communication. We have global English instead of Koine Greek. But we don't have the same kind of pressure they did.
That is the provocative thought to leave with, isn't it? The early church was forged in fire. It grew because it was hard, not in spite of it.
What do you mean?
It demanded everything from its followers. To become a Christian wasn't a casual decision. It could cost you your family, your job, and your life. So the only people who joined were the ones who were absolutely convinced it was worth dying for.
There was a high barrier to entry.
A very high barrier. So in our modern world, where comfort is king and commitment is often seen as optional, you have to ask the question.
Could the church today survive without the struggle that created it? Or was that very struggle, that persecution, actually the secret ingredient to its vitality?
The question worth pondering.
That's it for this deep dive into the origins of the Christian church. Thanks for listening.
We'll catch you on the next one.